I'm I'm curious what the IDF used to determine that these hostages were a threat to them. Like, were they holding guns? Were they shouting at the IDF? Were they like throwing stones or something? Like, what were they doing? Supposedly, it's said that they were dressed as Hamas, but if they weren't holding guns, that means they're unarmed. And why is the IDF shooting unarmed people instead of like capturing them? It's, a war crime to kill unarmed people.
The Israeli military has said its troops shot and killed 3 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza after mistakenly identifying them as a threat. The 3 men were abducted on October the 7th when Hamas, which is deemed a terrorist organisation by the UK government, carried out its attacks on Israel. The country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his heart went out to the hostages' families. From Jerusalem, here's our correspondent Lucy Williamson.
Israel's army is in Gaza to kill Hamas fighters and bring hostages home. Clear targets, obliterated in the chaos of conflict. 3 of those shot dead in the northern district of Shajaya, not Hamas gunmen, but the captives Israel came to save. One of them was Yotam Chaim, 28 years old, a drummer with a heavy metal band, kidnapped from kibbutz Kfar Azar. His mother spoke to the BBC last month.
They are talking about to release few here, few there. I know that they are playing with us, with our minds, with our hearts. We must hope. We must hope.
Another of those killed was 25-year-old Sama Al-Talake, the eldest son of 10 children from Kfar Hora, who worked with his father and brother in a hatchery and loved motorcycles. And Alon Shamriz, kidnapped from Kfar Azar. Israel's army said Yotam, Sama and Alon were mistakenly identified as a threat. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay, what's the criteria that the IDF uses to assess that somebody is a threat or not? Like, again, like, were these people holding guns or something? Like, what was going on? It is wild that they're shooting people and not determining first if they're a hostage or not when they're trying to rescue hostages.
Who called it an unbearable tragedy. Tonight, Israel's armed forces are once again bearing the weight of their failure to protect.
The IDF mistakenly identified 3 kidnapped Israelis as a threat. The force fired at them and they were killed. After the shooting, an immediate suspicion arose about the identity of the dead, and their bodies were quickly transferred for examination in Israel, and there the hostages were identified.
It's crazy that they're only identifying these hostages after the fact and not before they on a shooting spree. Like, I mean, how many other hostages have actually been killed by the IDF and just blamed on Hamas? This just makes me curious. Like, I mean, if the IDF is unwilling to like try to determine if a person is a hostage or not, how do we know if Hamas is actually killing the hostages?
At a vigil to mark the end of Hanukkah yesterday, Alon's mother said she still had hope.
We yearned for a miracle, hoping that the hostages would be back for Hanukkah, but unfortunately it didn't happen. Even so, we remain in hopeful anticipation and optimism that it will happen soon.
The torment expressed by the families of hostages has cut deeper tonight. Already angry with Israel's Prime Minister for not negotiating the release of more hostages, they also have his promise ringing in their ears that Israel's military campaign in Gaza would help bring their relatives home.
Well, so far, some of the relatives aren't being brought home because it's the Israeli government killing them. It's crazy how the IDF is not trying to find out beforehand if a person is a hostage or not and just opening fire on anyone and everyone.
Well, tonight, an army spokesman has been speaking to the BBC and giving a few more details about what went wrong. He said that the hostages were dressed in the same kind of clothes as the Hamas fighters and that there were clashes before and after they were shot between Israel and Hamas.
Okay, okay though, but were the hostages like carrying guns or something? I mean, just because they're dressed to look like Hamas doesn't mean they're in armed combat. If the Israeli government knows that Hamas is dressing people to look like them, uh, this just shows that the Israeli government needs to be more careful in just shooting on sight anybody and everybody that they see. I mean, you can't claim you're like trying to save hostages when your government is killing the hostages.
Tonight, the families of some of those Gaza hostages are now marching to the army headquarters here in a spontaneous protest. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel will dress its